Today is Wednesday, July the 15th. We continue to look at the readings for this coming Sunday, July the 19th, and the 7th Sunday after Pentecost. Today we look at our second reading, which comes from Paul's letter to the Romans in the 8th chapter, verses 12 through 15. You may follow along if you have that in front of you. If not, listen as I read it for you, and I will begin with the introduction to the readings. For Paul, true spirituality means that we experience the reality of the Spirit, which enables us to pray as God's children, keeps us in solidarity with creation, and gives us unseen hope that God will liberate us and creation from bondage to death and decay. Paul writes, "So then, brothers and sisters, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, 'Abba, Father,' it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if in fact we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly, while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience." Sometime back, I think I mentioned that this letter to the Romans is Paul in his most developed theological writing. And as such, it has some very deep theological teachings. This section of Paul's letter to the Romans certainly fits into that category. So I will try to help us understand as best as I am able, fully understanding that Paul was far more intelligent than I. In Greek, even more so than in English, the word for flesh, which in the Greek is sarx, points to something different from that for which the word body points. The word body in Greek is soma. So sarx is flesh, soma is body. In Greek, these two words mean very different things. This is certainly true as the Apostle Paul uses the two words. Paul's good news is not escaping life in the body in favor of an existence in some spiritual plane separated from the world. When Romans 8 is read, it helps to keep this in mind so that we do not dismiss Paul as some ancient stuffed shirt, or worse, maybe embrace him as some Gnostic guru. Gnostics were a group that held themselves above other Christians, declaring that they had a secret knowledge from God through the spiritual plane of existence. Gnostics are considered heretics by the Christian Church Universal. There's a lot more to the story than that, but not for this day. In Paul's writings, flesh almost always signifies a power, along with sin, that resists the Spirit of God, and that must be conquered if human beings, body and all, are to be free from what Paul calls the bondage of decay and obtain the glorious freedom of God's children. That glorious freedom is not freedom from the material world. Rather, it's a freedom within restored creation. It is the freedom of an embodied life that reflects, as it has from the beginning, from creation, the image and the glory of God. In this reading, Paul points to that freedom and describes what it is like to hope for such a thing in our present day, in the here and now. Take note of the words that Paul uses in these verses to describe our personal relationship with God through Jesus. Sons, daughters, Abba, Father, children, adoption, heirs, and joint heirs. This vocabulary describes relationships within a family, within a household. In Romans 8, Paul uses the word son or child to refer to Jesus' siblings, us, we who are led by the Spirit. As flesh had referred to a power that enslaves humans and keeps them from participating in God's glory, the Spirit is the power that frees us and enlivens humans for a new identity as the children of God. Regarding suffering in this passage, I don't think it's any surprise to us that Americans do as much as we can to avoid suffering. Doctors prescribe a variety of medications to help with that. And our society has now such a thing called a pain clinic, to which someone can go and be prescribed even heavier and stronger doses of painkillers. Therefore, verses in the Bible that talk about suffering along with Jesus can make us feel so anxious, and it even makes some turn away from Christ because they don't want to suffer. We are joint heirs with Jesus, suffering with him and being glorified with him. The idea is not to say that anyone, including Jesus, earns glory by suffering. Rather, as Paul seeks to describe it, it means to be a joint heir with Jesus. He notes that the joint heir's life is characterized by the same pattern that shaped Jesus' life. To be connected to Jesus is to know humiliation and also exaltation. To be a joint heir with Jesus is to share in Jesus' suffering, death, and resurrection. Paul's definition of suffering is going to be broadened out a little bit further in verses 35 through 39 of this chapter 8. And it will include anything that seems to threaten to separate us from God's love. For now, the suffering that Paul speaks about is a suffering that comes from knowing what the world could be, even as we live in the world such as it is. To borrow an image from the gospel reading for next Sunday, the field was planted with good seed. It was going to be beautiful as it grew to maturity, except an enemy came along and sowed weeds among the wheat. And even as the crop matured, the field became a mess. The crop was threatened, and the workers nearly made things worse by trying to take control of the situation and tear up the entire field. Paul expands on his message further. He talks about the mutual suffering of all creation. All of it. The whole of creation. Everything. Paul says groans together and suffers together. And not only the creation, he writes, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. One commentator writes this: believers are being saved, not from creation, but with creation. The sonship, daughtership, they are privileged to share in some sense with Christ. They in turn share in some sense with creation. So we're all linked together. When Jesus was sent into the world, it was for the whole world, all of creation, not just for human beings. There is in Paul and in these words a sense of waiting, as well as a sense of eager anticipation. Perhaps like some young children wait with eager anticipation for Santa Claus to come on Christmas. Or perhaps like some parents or grandparents even wait with eager anticipation for a child to return home from military deployment. Maybe you can understand this a little bit if you've ever tried to crane your neck. That is, to kind of stretch it out like a crane so you can see further down the road. Maybe an example of being stuck in traffic and you can't see because traffic is backed up so much you don't know what the problem is, but you're trying to see over the cars or you're trying to see around the cars and you know it's not going to work, but still you crane your neck to see what's coming ahead. In the gospel reading for Sunday, which I'll talk about more tomorrow, the owner of the field tells the hired hands, the workers, to allow the wheat and the weeds to grow together until the harvest. At the harvest, the owner has more than just grain then. It ends up he has some kindling for his fireplace. The details of redemption for humanity and for the rest of creation will probably be as surprising to us as the dual harvest of the wheat and kindling was to the farmer's hired workers. And certainly the wait often passes with excruciating slowness. Even so, with a mixture of eagerness and endurance, we hope for what we do not see. Thank you again for joining me today for these mini Bible study series on the lessons for the upcoming Sunday. This Sunday, the 7th Sunday after Pentecost, July 19th, 2020. Until next time, take care and God bless.